Okay, the next video in our lineup here is the Schedule G portion of the Form 5471. So Schedule G is a bunch of yes or no questions, but some of the questions direct you to complete additional forms or provide additional supplementary information directly within the schedule. So Schedule G, if we go back to our table here on the required information table, again, this is in the 5471 instructions, we can see here Schedule G and G1 are separate items, right? So Schedule G needs to be completed for Cat 1C filers, Cat 3, 4, 5A, and 5C filers. Now remember, our shareholder here, John, basically qualifies for almost all of these category filers, so we're definitely doing a Schedule G for John. Now again, Schedule G is, again, a number of yes or no questions, but you might have to file additional pieces with it depending on how you answer these questions, right? That's really what it's designed to do. The other thing I would note here, though, is Schedule G, because they are yes or no questions, a lot of these you can do Schedule G kind of early on in the prep of the Form 5471, but we'll see with some of the questions here that you actually need to complete other schedules first and then answer the questions here accordingly. And so we'll get to that. It's later down in the schedule, so I'll get to that question in a bit here. But what I want to do is just go over some of the questions here and provide a little more color or clarification as to why you might need to answer these questions or what additional information you might need to provide. And then I'll also highlight some that are probably not going to apply to you, right? Some of these things are just really obscure and you don't see them often in practice, or they just apply to really big companies. So question one, it's very simply asking if the foreign corporations, the CFC here, owned at least 10% of an interest, either directly or indirectly, in a foreign partnership, right? So just yes or no, very, very straightforward, right? Look at the investments that the CFC has. If it has a 10% interest or greater in a foreign partnership, then you answer yes, right? And there are additional required statements that might be included, maybe in 8865, right? Question two, did the FC own an interest in a trust? In our case, yes, right? If we go back and we look at our structure chart here, we can see that our Cayman Islands offshore entity, the CFC, owns 100% of a revocable grantor trust. It's a U.S. trust, right? But the question doesn't specify whether U.S. or foreign. It simply asks, did you have an interest in a trust? And in our case, yes, right? The answer is yes, so we've indicated yes there. Question three, does the FC own any foreign entities that are disregarded, right? So where would this maybe arise? If you had a CFC here and maybe owned 100% of another actual company, so another Cayman Islands company, and that Cayman Islands company, perhaps you filed a entity classification election to make it disregarded. So if this was a Cayman Islands company that had a disregarded entity election made, that's by filing 8832, or maybe a Bermuda entity filing an 8832. If it's a DRE, it's a foreign company, and it's a disregarded entity, and so you would answer yes here and then complete the 8858, right? Now, questions 4A and down here, base erosion payments. So Section 59A, this is very likely not going to apply to anybody watching this video. 59A, the base erosion payments only apply to really, really large companies, gross receipts of 500 million or more. Most cases, that's not going to apply to you, right? So these are going to just be no questions. If we move on the page here, 6A, are you taking any FDII deductions? So FDII kind of goes in tandem with the GILTI inclusion. In this case, no. I have separate videos on FDII and additional ones on GILTI. I'll put some links to those below as well, but in this case, no, none. So what you find when you read these is a lot of this is frankly not going to apply to you. And so that's why, for this example here, I tried to put forward kind of a simple one, which we will have an answer to line 14 down here. So we'll get to this. But let's see. So the FC, so question 11, FC participate in any reportable transactions. Again, reportable transactions, you can find a nice list of them in Treasury Reg 1.6011-4. Again, in this case, no, we didn't have anything really obscure, so we don't need to file an 8886, nothing like that. Here's where we start to get into the yes, no with some additional info, right? So question 14, did you answer yes to any of the questions in the instructions for line 14? And this is the Schedule G worksheet. So Schedule G is what we're looking at here, right? These questions, line items 1 through 19A. But Schedule G also has an additional worksheet, and that worksheet is just for line 14. So I've got the worksheet here on the next page, right? So this is in the Form 5471 instructions if you need it. Worksheet for Schedule G, line 14. Now, remember when I said Schedule G, you can kind of do those yes-no questions maybe at the very beginning, but question 14, you have to do the Schedule I first, right? So what Schedule G, line 14 in this worksheet is designed to accomplish is when you complete Schedule I, Worksheet A, right? So remember, Schedule I is the allocation of Subpart F income to the U.S. shareholder. And in order to do Schedule I, you have to complete Worksheet A for Schedule I, right? So we've already covered that video. So assuming you've already done that Schedule I in the Worksheet A, then you can move on and complete the Schedule G, line 14 worksheet. So overall, what is this trying to do? This is trying to figure out what kind of inclusions or exclusions or Subpart F income limitations might apply to the U.S. shareholder. So you have a lot of questions here. On the far left column, you have the question, and then this column here, it says see Worksheet A in the Schedule I instructions. So they're giving you line item references to better answer this question, right? And then we have the corresponding code here, which is ultimately going to be reported up here on line 14 again, right? So line 14, it's asking us, if we answer yes to any of those questions, check yes, and then enter all of the codes you might have down here. So you can list them up here. The software we use puts them down here, right? So EP is one of the codes that's going to apply to us. So a lot of questions here, right? You got the question, the reference to Schedule I, Worksheet A, the code description, and then if you answered yes to this question here, then follow the instructions listed here in the far right-hand column, right? So if we just look at a few examples here, right? So question 1 is asking us if the sum of the CFC's foreign-based company income and gross insurance income is less than the lesser of 5% of gross or $1 million. So what are they asking there? Well, the reference here is then go look at Schedule I, Worksheet A, and ultimately what they're doing here, there is a de minimis exclusion for Subpart F income. So if you're a big CFC and you have a lot of income that's not Subpart F income, and you have a little bit of Subpart F income in there, then you have this de minimis exclusion where they say, okay, well, you can just kind of wash it with the rest of your income. You don't have to separately state the Subpart F income and you get an inclusion, right? So that's, and then line item 2 is a high tax exemption. Right, so did the CFC receive any item of income subject to an effective rate imposed by a foreign country greater than 90% of the maximum rate of tax specified in Section 11, right? So that high tax exemption effectively is, look, if you're a CFC and you're paying a lot of really high taxes in the foreign country where you are a CFC, under the high tax exclusion, you can exempt that income from the Subpart F inclusion, right? And so you just go down the list, right? Ask and answer each question, follow the instructions, and then to the extent that you have any yes answers, then those codes are put up on line 14, and then you might have an exclusion down here. So the one we're going to focus on that applies to us is the EMP limitation, right? So the EMP limitation down here, question 21. During the tax year, did the Subpart F income of the CFC exceed the EMP of such corporation? Remember, we talked about this when we went through the Schedule I video and Worksheet A. Subpart F is limited to the EMP of the CFC, right? So if you don't have enough EMP to cover all the Subpart F income, then the Subpart F income is limited to that EMP, and you have a carryover. So this EMP... so we can see here, in other words, right, they're trying to make it clear. In other words, what they're saying is that line 36 of Worksheet A greater than line 37. So if we jump back to Schedule I and the worksheet A, just for reference here, so you don't have to go back to the video again. So they're asking, is the total Subpart F income greater than line 37C, right? So this is the E&P limitation. And the answer is yes, right? Our Subpart F income of 32K is greater than 23K. So what we're going to do here, per the worksheet instructions, it asks us enter the excess of line 36 over line 37, right? And so that is the E&P limitation. That is the excess of sub F over earnings and profits for the current period. Okay, so you want to do this worksheet in its entirety, but as it notes here, this is kept for your records. So this is actually not filed with the IRS. All the IRS wants to see is all the other schedules that we did, and then they just want to see, obviously Schedule G goes along with it, and Schedule G, we answered yes, and we put EP for the E&P limitation. So again, this worksheet, you absolutely must do this, but it's not filed with the return. So if you e-file it, none of this data is going to be sent. If you paper file it, you should not include this with the paper filing. But again, right, very, very important. Do not skip this. Do not make an assumption that because this schedule worksheet isn't filed with the IRS, you don't need to do it, you don't need it. You absolutely need to do this, right? So absolutely go through each question. Ask yourself yes or no. Do they apply? If yes, follow the instructions on the far right column, and then you should be, and then you should have a complete Schedule G completed for you. Okay, so question 14, again, that's a very long question to answer because of the reference to the worksheet, but very important to do it. So question 15, interest expense disallowance, right? So the 163J and the regulations that are under there have now limits on how much interest expense a corporation might be able to deduct, and a lot of that has to do with earning strippings. In this case, none of this applies to us. If we look at our profit and loss, I don't think we had any interest expense, right? So we have some interest income, a couple other expenses here, but yeah, no interest expense, so no interest expense limitations that would apply to us. Okay. And see some other items here, right? The question 18, does the reporting corp have any loans to or from related parties? Again, very important, right? Anytime you have related party transactions, almost always there's more disclosure that's required, and this is one of these questions, right? Okay, so that covers it for Schedule G. Again, I know I kind of covered, high level answer, elaborated on some of these questions. I think I'll do some follow-up videos where we dive into more detail on specific ones, but for a very simple example that we've got in front of us, again, you'll note that almost all of these are no questions, except for the trust disclosure, right? We do have an interest in a trust. But, the idea here is what the IRS is really trying to accomplish here is get more information on the company and also help bring to your attention what additional disclosures, statements, or forms might need to be required based on how you answer these questions. Okay, so that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave me comments below on this one. And now we'll move on to the next video.